I'm writing this because I need to get it off my chest before I lose my mind. My wife, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, has betrayed me in ways I never imagined. And the worst part? It wasn't just one betrayal. It was a web of lies, deception, and manipulation so deep that it's left me questioning everything. It all started 2 years ago when Rachel told me she wanted to visit her sister abroad. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, her sister lived halfway across the world, and they'd always been close. We had just welcomed our first child, a beautiful baby boy named Theo, and Rachel seemed like she needed a break from the stress of being a new mom. I encouraged her to go, even helped book the flights. The first trip seemed harmless. She came back with photos, stories about her sister's kids, and even some gifts for Theo and me. But then, a few months later, she wanted to go again. And then again. Her visits became more frequent, too frequent. I chalked it up to postpartum stress or homesickness, but deep down, something didn't sit right. Still, I trusted her. Rachel had always been independent, and I didn't want to be the overbearing husband who questioned her every move. So I let it slide, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. That was until I found the letter. One night, while she was asleep, I was cleaning up the mess on the dining table. That's when I saw it, a piece of paper tucked between a pile of magazines. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't from her sister. It was from a man. A man who called her his angel. A man who signed off with, "Counting the days until you're back in my arms." My blood ran cold. Who the hell was this? I stared at the letter for what felt like hours, every word searing itself into my mind. Was this some kind of joke? A misunderstanding? But no, there was no way to explain away the intimate tone, the way he described her smile, her laugh, her touch. I didn't wake her up that night. I didn't scream or throw accusations. Instead, I sat in the dark, trying to piece together the cracks in our life that I had ignored for so long. The next day, I asked her about the trips. Casually. Like it wasn't killing me inside. "How's your sister doing?" I asked. "Is she planning to visit us anytime soon?" Rachel hesitated. Just for a moment. Then she smiled, a smile I'd seen 1,000 times before but now seemed so hollow. "She's good. Busy with the kids. But I'm thinking of visiting her again next month." Next month? That was the moment I decided I needed answers. I told myself I'd give her the benefit of the doubt, that I'd investigate before confronting her. So I started looking into her trips, flight records, receipts, anything I could find. What I discovered was the beginning of the nightmare: the hotel bookings, the restaurant reservations for two, all in a country far from where her sister lived. And then there was him. A millionaire businessman with a family of his own. A man who had been quietly living a double life with my wife for 2 years. She wasn't visiting her sister. She was visiting him. I couldn't believe it. My wife, the woman I'd shared my life with for 7 years, had been carrying on an affair with a man who had everything: money, influence, and a family of his own. She was living 2 lives, splitting her time between our home and his world of wealth and luxury. But I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. So, I started digging deeper. I checked her email when she left her laptop open one night. She wasn't careless. Most of her correspondence was clean. But in the drafts folder, I found fragments of unsent messages that made my stomach churn. One read, "I can't wait to see you again. Your arms feel like home. I miss the life we've built, even if it's in secret." Another said, "I wish things were simpler. I hate lying to him, but you're worth it." Worth it? I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles turned white. Who was this man to her? And how long had she been planning to keep this charade going? The more I uncovered, the worse it got. I checked our bank statements and noticed unusual expenses. Private car hires, boutique shopping sprees, spa treatments. I'd never questioned them before. She always said they were gifts for her sister, or that she'd been treating herself after a rough week. But now I knew who the real recipient was. I felt like I was going crazy, trapped in this loop of disbelief and fury. But no matter how much I hated her for what she was doing, part of me still hoped there was an explanation, something that would make it all less devastating. I wasn't ready to let her go. Not yet. Not with Theo in the middle of this mess. So I played dumb. I acted like nothing had changed, even though every kiss, every touch, every laugh felt like acid burning through me. I wanted to scream at her, to demand the truth, but I needed more. I needed the whole picture. Then came her next trip. She told me it was another visit to her sister's, only this time, she seemed off. Usually, she'd be excited, texting her sister nonstop about plans and packing days in advance. But this time, she was quieter, more reserved. I couldn't tell if she was feeling guilty or if she'd started to suspect that I knew something. When she left for the airport, I followed her. I stayed back, keeping a safe distance as she dropped off her luggage and checked in. She moved through security, her phone glued to her hand. I didn't want to cause a scene in public, not yet. But as soon as she boarded her flight, I confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't flying to her sister's country. Her boarding pass was for a completely different destination. The destination where he lived. I spent the next few days in a haze of anger and determination. While she was away, I installed tracking software on her phone. I'd always been decent with tech, and I wanted to make sure she couldn't hide anything from me again. Her text messages, her location history, even her social media accounts, I'd see it all. When she returned, I asked her how the trip was. She smiled, her face lighting up with a lie. "It was great," she said. "The kids are growing up so fast. My sister said they can't wait to visit us next summer." I nodded, pretending to believe her. "I'm glad you had a good time." That night, as she slept beside me, her phone buzzed. My heart raced as I reached for it, careful not to wake her. The message was from a number saved as "Work. You looked beautiful this weekend. Counting the days until our next meeting. Miss you, Angel." My chest tightened. She stirred, murmuring something in her sleep. I quickly put the phone back, my mind racing. I'd been holding on to some shred of hope that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. But this was it. I didn't sleep at all that night. Over the next week, I monitored her phone obsessively. I saw the messages they exchanged, their plans, their pet names for each other, their dreams of one day when they wouldn't have to sneak around anymore. Every word was like a knife to the heart. And then, one day, I saw a message that stopped me cold. "Have you told him yet? He deserves to know the truth." What truth? My mind spiraled. What could she possibly mean? Was it about the affair? Was she planning to confess? But then, another message came through, one that turned my stomach inside out. "He should know that Theo isn't his." Those words hit me like a sledgehammer. Theo isn't his. I couldn't breathe. My head spun, my chest tightened, and I felt like I was about to be sick. Theo, my son, the baby I had held moments after his birth, the child I had fed, changed, and sung to sleep night after night, wasn't mine? It couldn't be true. There had to be some mistake. I refused to believe it. But the messages kept coming. "I'll tell him when the time is right. You said that months ago. You can't keep stringing him along." Stringing me along? Was that what I was to her? Some backup plan? A convenient provider while she played house with someone else? I needed answers, but I knew confronting her now would only lead to more lies. I had to be absolutely certain before I did anything. So, I made an appointment with a DNA testing service. A friend of mine, a doctor, helped expedite the process. I told him it was routine, nothing serious. I couldn't bear to share the real reason, not yet. The hardest part was swabbing Theo's cheek. He giggled as I distracted him with silly faces, oblivious to the weight of what I was doing. My heart broke as I held him close, praying that the results would prove my suspicions wrong. The results came back 3 days later. I remember sitting in my car outside the clinic, the envelope in my hands feeling heavier than anything I'd ever held. My hands shook as I tore it open, scanning the page for the answer I dreaded. Probability of paternity 0%. I stared at the paper, reading and rereading those words, hoping they'd somehow change. But they didn't. Theo wasn't mine. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, the pain in my hand barely registering. Tears streamed down my face, hot and relentless. How could she do this to me? To us? That night, I couldn't even look at her. She came home late, claiming she'd had a meeting that ran over. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't completely destroyed me. I nodded silently, my mind churning with rage and despair. The following weeks were the hardest of my life. Every time I looked at Theo, my heart ached. He was innocent in all of this, a little boy who had no idea the truth of his parentage. I still loved him, but that love was now laced with pain. And Rachel? She had no idea I knew. She continued her facade, smiling, laughing, playing the role of a devoted wife and mother. But every time she touched me, every time she spoke to me, all I could think about were the lies. I started planning. I didn't want revenge born out of blind rage. I wanted it to be calculated, precise, devastating. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. First, I gathered evidence. I documented everything, the text messages, the receipts, the travel logs. I hired a private investigator to dig into her lover's life. He was exactly what I expected, a wealthy businessman with a picture-perfect family. But his wife had no idea about the affair either. Then, I consulted a lawyer. I wanted to know my options, not just for a divorce, but for full custody of Theo. Despite the DNA test, I had been the one raising him. I wasn't going to let her take him away, even if he wasn't biologically mine. Finally, I set the stage for the confrontation. Rachel had another business trip planned for the weekend. I told her I had work of my own to catch up on, and encouraged her to go. She left without a second thought, smiling as she kissed me goodbye. As soon as she was gone, I contacted the private investigator. He confirmed what I already knew, she was meeting him. They had booked a suite at a luxury hotel, the kind of place we could never afford but that her lover could pay for without blinking. I drove to the hotel that evening, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I wasn't sure what I would do when I got there, but I knew I needed to see it for myself. When I arrived, I waited in the parking lot, watching the entrance like a predator stalking its prey. It didn't take long for them to appear. Rachel and her lover walked out of the hotel, laughing and holding hands like a couple of teenagers sneaking around. My blood boiled as I watched her smile at him, the same smile she used to give me. I followed them to the restaurant where they had a reservation. I stayed out of sight, my phone in hand, documenting every moment. When they left, I followed them again, back to the hotel, where they disappeared into their suite. I stood outside that door for what felt like an eternity, the sounds of their laughter muffled by the walls. My fists clenched, my mind racing with thoughts of what I could do. But I held back. Not yet. Instead, I left a gift at their door, a manila envelope containing printouts of their texts, photos of them together, and a copy of the DNA test results. Then I walked away. I didn't sleep that night. I kept picturing their faces when they opened the envelope. Would Rachel cry? Would she run to him for comfort? Or would she come straight home to face me? But she didn't come home. Not that night, not the next morning. Instead, she texted me late the next day. Flight delayed. I'll be home tonight. Kiss Theo for me. I stared at the screen, the rage bubbling beneath the surface. She was still pretending, still lying. Did she think I wouldn't figure it out? Did she think I wouldn't fight back? When she finally walked through the door that evening, I was ready. Hey, babe, she said, dropping her bag by the door and slipping off her shoes. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened. How was your weekend? I didn't answer. Her smile faltered when she saw the look on my face. What's wrong? She asked, feigning concern. Sit down, I said, my voice cold and steady. She hesitated, her eyes darting to Theo, who was playing with blocks in the corner. Can it wait? I just got back and... Now. She froze, then slowly sat down on the couch. I could see the panic starting to creep into her expression. I tossed the manila envelope onto the coffee table in front of her. "Open it!" "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just open it." Her hands shook as she picked up the envelope and slid out the contents. She flipped through the pages, her eyes widening with every piece of evidence: the texts, the photos, the DNA test. Her face went pale. "Care to explain?" I asked, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right words, but nothing came out. Finally, she managed to whisper, "How did you?" "It doesn't matter how I found out," I snapped. "What matters is that you've been lying to me for years." 2 years, Rachel. 2 years of sneaking around, of pretending, of making me think Theo was mine. "He is yours," she said quickly, her voice desperate. I slammed my hand on the coffee table, making her jump. "Don't lie to me! I have the DNA test. Theo isn't mine, and you damn well knew it." Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. "I didn't want to hurt you," she sobbed. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Didn't mean for it to go this far?" I echoed, laughing bitterly. "You've been living a double life, Rachel. How far did you think it was going to go?" She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you." "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You lost me anyway." For the next hour, she tried to explain herself. She told me about the affair, about how it started during her first visit to her sister. She said she'd felt trapped after Theo was born, overwhelmed by motherhood and the monotony of our life. She claimed she didn't plan to fall for him, that it just happened. I listened in silence, my anger simmering beneath the surface. None of her excuses mattered. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. When she finished, she looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. "What happens now?" she asked. I stood up and looked her dead in the eye. "Now? You pack your things and get out." Her jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious," I said, my voice as cold as steel. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going for custody of Theo." "You can't take him from me," she said, her voice rising. "He's my son. He's our son," I said sharply. "I've been there for him every day of his life. You might have given birth to him, but I'm the one who's raised him." She started to protest, but I cut her off. "You can fight me in court if you want, but I have enough evidence to bury you. The affair, the lies, the DNA test, it's all there. You won't win." Her sobs turned into wails as she begged me to reconsider, to give her another chance. But I didn't budge. I'd made my decision, and I wasn't going back. That night, she packed a bag and left. I told her she could stay with her sister, or whoever she wanted, but she wasn't staying here. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. The life I'd known was over, but I wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. The silence after Rachel left was deafening. Theo didn't understand what was happening, thank God. I told him Mommy had to visit her sister again, and gave him a toy to distract him. He smiled, oblivious to the storm tearing our lives apart, and went back to stacking his blocks. I envied him, the simplicity of his world. Once Theo was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope Rachel had left behind. The weight of what I'd done, what I still had to do, pressed down on me like a boulder. But the rage was stronger. She thought she could play me, lie to me, build a life with someone else while I raised their child? No. She was going to pay. First, I finalized my plans with my lawyer. The custody battle was going to be brutal, but I was ready. Despite Theo not being biologically mine, I'd been his primary caregiver. I had proof of her affair, her deception, and her abandonment. My lawyer assured me that judges often prioritize the child's stability over biology, especially when the biological parent had proven themselves unreliable. Still, I needed to solidify my case. I called the private investigator again, asking him to dig deeper into Rachel's lover's life. If I was going to confront him, I needed every scrap of leverage I could get. And that confrontation was coming. Soon. The PI worked quickly. Within days, I had a full dossier on the man. His name was Daniel Harper, a millionaire with a thriving business empire, a trophy wife, and 2 teenage kids. On the surface, he looked like the poster child for success. But underneath? A string of affairs, shady business deals, and enough skeletons in his closet to fill a graveyard. One detail stood out: his wife, Caroline. She wasn't just some trophy. She was smart, resourceful, and had her own influential connections. She was also completely in the dark about Daniel's double life. That gave me an idea. I drafted a letter to Caroline, careful to include just enough evidence to make her listen without overwhelming her. Photos of Daniel and Rachel together, snippets of their texts, and a note explaining the situation. I wasn't cruel. I didn't want to destroy her, but she deserved to know the truth. I mailed the letter anonymously and waited. Meanwhile, Rachel kept texting me, begging to talk, pleading for another chance. I ignored her. She'd chosen her path, now she had to walk it alone. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered, my voice guarded. "Is this Theo's father?" The voice was calm, icy even. "Yes. Who's asking?" "This is Caroline Harper." My heart raced. She knew. "Thank you for the enlightening package," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I had no idea my husband was such a busy man. I think we should meet." I agreed immediately. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe on the edge of town. When I arrived, Caroline was already there, sipping a coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked exactly like the photos I'd seen, elegant, poised, the kind of woman who could command a room with a single glance. "You're him," she said as I sat down. "I am." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were the photos and text I'd sent her. "This is thorough," she said. "Almost like you've been planning this for a while." "I needed you to know the truth," I replied. She leaned back, studying me. "Why now? Why not keep it quiet and let him keep his secrets?" I clenched my fists under the table. "Because his secrets destroyed my life. I'm not going to let him walk away unscathed." Her lips curled into a cold smile. "Good. Neither am I." We talked for over an hour, swapping stories, sharing evidence, piecing together the timeline of Daniel and Rachel's affair. The more she spoke, the more my rage deepened. This wasn't a fling. This was a calculated, ongoing betrayal that had torn apart 2 families. When we were done, Caroline stood, extending her hand. "I'll handle Daniel. You handle Rachel. Let's make sure either of them forgets what they've done." I shook her hand, a silent agreement forged in shared pain. The next phase of my plan was already in motion. With Caroline's help, I leaked the affair to the local press. Daniel's perfect image began to crumble overnight. Stories of his infidelity spread like wildfire, tarnishing his reputation and jeopardizing his business. Rachel called me in a panic when the news broke. "What did you do?" she screamed. "I made sure the world knows the truth," I said, my voice cold. "Just like you and Daniel deserve." "You're ruining everything," she cried. "No," I said calmly. "You did that all on your own." Her sobs filled the line, but I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of satisfaction. But I wasn't done yet. Rachel's calls became relentless over the next few days, alternating between tearful pleas and furious accusations. Each time, I let them go to voicemail. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses or explanations anymore. I was focused on the next steps. The fallout from the press leak was immediate and brutal. Daniel's wife, Caroline, filed for divorce within days, publicly denouncing him for his infidelity. She was ruthless, leveraging her connections to ensure the scandal stayed in the spotlight. As the story gained traction, Daniel's business partners began to distance themselves, citing ethical concerns. His empire was crumbling, and I was more than happy to watch. Rachel wasn't faring much better. Her social media, once a carefully curated collection of picturesque family moments, became a battleground. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers flooded her posts with questions and accusations. Is it true? How could you do this to your family? What about your son? She tried to delete the comments, but they kept coming, relentless and unforgiving. Meanwhile, I focused on Theo. I kept our routine as normal as possible, shielding him from the chaos that Rachel had unleashed. He was too young to understand what was happening, and I was determined to keep it that way. But Rachel wasn't going to let go without a fight. One evening, as I was putting Theo to bed, I heard a knock at the door. My stomach tightened as I made my way to the foyer, half expecting it to be Rachel. Instead, it was a man in a suit, a courier, holding an envelope. "Mr. Daniels?" he asked. "Yes?" He handed me the envelope. "You've been served." I took it, my hands trembling with anger. As the courier walked away, I ripped it open, scanning the papers inside. Rachel was suing for custody of Theo. The audacity of it made my blood boil. After everything she'd done, she had the nerve to try and take him away from me? The next day, I met with my lawyer to prepare for the battle ahead. He wasn't surprised by Rachel's move. "This is standard in cases like these," he said. "She's trying to regain control. But with the evidence we have, I'm confident we can win." Still, the thought of facing her in court made my skin crawl. A week later, the custody hearing began. Rachel sat across from me in the courtroom, looking fragile and worn. But her appearance didn't fool me. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This was a stranger, someone who had lied and betrayed me at every turn. Her lawyer argued that Theo needed his mother, that she was the primary caregiver, and that removing him from her life would be detrimental to his well-being. My lawyer countered with the evidence I'd gathered, the affair, the lies, her abandonment of the family home. He painted a picture of a woman who had put her selfish desires above her responsibilities as a wife and mother. When it was Rachel's turn to speak, she broke down on the stand. She begged the judge to let her keep Theo, claiming she was a good mother who had made a mistake. "I love my son," she sobbed. "He's my world." I didn't flinch. When it was my turn, I told the court about the nights I'd spent feeding Theo, the mornings I'd spent playing with him, the bond we shared. "He may not be my biological son," I said, my voice steady, "but I am his father in every way that matters. And I won't let him be caught in the crossfire of Rachel's choices." The judge took several days to deliberate, but when the ruling came, it was clear. I was granted primary custody of Theo, with Rachel allowed supervised visitation. The relief was overwhelming, but it was bittersweet. Theo was safe, but the family I'd once cherished was gone. Rachel's reaction was explosive. She showed up at the house unannounced, screaming at me from the driveway. "You can't keep him from me!" she yelled, tears streaming down her face. "You're ruining my life!" I stepped outside, my expression cold and unyielding. "You ruined your own life, Rachel. I'm just protecting Theo from the fallout." She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, but I didn't move. I couldn't let her emotions sway me, not anymore. As she left, I realized this wasn't the end. Rachel would keep trying, keep fighting to claw back what she'd lost. But I was ready for her. And I still had one more move to make. After the court ruling, Rachel's presence in Theo's life dwindled to short, supervised visits. She tried to put on a brave face for him, but I could see the cracks in her composure. Each visit drained her, and though part of me felt a flicker of pity, it was overshadowed by satisfaction. She was finally experiencing the pain she'd inflicted on me. But I wasn't done yet. Rachel and Daniel thought their biggest hurdles were the public humiliation and court battles. They were wrong. They hadn't seen the depths of my resolve. The destruction of their public images was just the beginning. I started with Rachel. Her job at the marketing firm was her lifeline. She needed that income to survive, to fund her futile custody attempts. So, I made sure her bosses learned the truth. Through an anonymous tip, I sent them the same evidence I'd shared with the court: the texts, the photos, even details about the time she'd claimed to be on business trips, while she was with Daniel. A week later, she was fired. She showed up at my door that night, her face pale and streaked with tears. "You cost me my job!" she shouted, shoving a crumpled termination letter in my face. "You cost yourself your job," I replied calmly. "Actions have consequences, Rachel. You're just finally facing yours." Her fury turned to desperation. "How am I supposed to support myself? How am I supposed to see Theo if I can't even afford to live?" "That's not my problem," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "You should have thought about that before you decided to live two lives." She stormed off, but her cries echoed in my mind long after she left. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, but I told myself it was necessary. I had to ensure she couldn't rise again, not while she was still capable of hurting Theo or me. Next, I turned my attention to Daniel. Caroline had already decimated his reputation, but I wanted to make sure he couldn't rebuild. I dug deeper into his business dealings, working with my private investigator to uncover every shady transaction and unethical practice. The evidence was damning. Fraud, tax evasion, illegal kickbacks, it was all there, waiting to be exposed. I sent the files anonymously to several major news outlets, and within days, Daniel's name was splashed across headlines. "Business tycoon faces legal trouble amid scandal," the headlines read. His empire, already on shaky ground, began to collapse under the weight of the allegations. Rachel, of course, wasn't spared from the fallout. She had tied her life to his, and when his world crumbled, so did hers. Then I made my final move. One afternoon, I called Caroline. "I want to thank you," I said. "For what?" she replied, her tone sharp but curious. "For standing up to him. For helping me expose what they did." She sighed. "It wasn't about helping you. It was about taking back my own life. But I suppose we both got what we wanted." "There's one last thing I want," I said. "And I think it'll interest you, too." I told her about my plan. To confront Daniel and Rachel together, to make them face the consequences of their actions in the most public way possible. Caroline agreed without hesitation. We set the trap carefully. Caroline told Daniel she wanted to meet to discuss the divorce settlement, and she invited Rachel as a supportive friend. I knew they'd fall for it. Daniel was desperate to salvage what little control he had left, and Rachel was clinging to whatever scraps of his affection remained. The meeting was held in a private room at an upscale restaurant. Caroline and I arrived early, positioning hidden cameras and microphones to record everything. When Daniel and Rachel walked in, they were all smiles, until they saw me sitting across from Caroline. Their expressions shifted instantly, confusion then panic. "What is this?" Daniel demanded. "Sit down," Caroline said coldly. They hesitated but complied, their unease palpable. I leaned forward, locking eyes with Rachel. "This is your reckoning." For the next hour, Caroline and I laid everything bare. The affair, the lies, the destruction they'd caused. Rachel sobbed, begging for forgiveness, while Daniel tried to deflect, insisting it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But the cameras didn't lie. And neither did the mountain of evidence we presented. When it was over, Rachel looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "I want you to disappear," I said, my voice cold and final. "Leave me and Theo alone. You've done enough damage." Daniel tried to speak, but Caroline cut him off. "And you," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "will give me everything I'm asking for in the divorce. Or I'll make sure every skeleton in your closet comes to light." They left that restaurant broken, their lives in ruins. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The weeks following that confrontation were a blur of quiet victories. Rachel and Daniel's lives unraveled even further, and for once, I wasn't the one struggling to breathe under the weight of betrayal. They were. Rachel tried to reach out a few more times, mostly through emails and the occasional voicemail. Her messages were pitiful, desperate attempts to salvage a relationship she'd shattered. Theo needs his mother. Please let me explain. You don't understand how much I regret what I did. Can't we just talk? I'm begging you. Let me see my son. I deleted every message without responding. She didn't deserve another chance to poison our lives. Daniel, on the other hand, was drowning in his own failures. Caroline had taken him to the cleaners in the divorce. He lost his house, a significant portion of his assets, and custody of his children. His business was in shambles, his reputation irreparably damaged. And Rachel? She was left with nothing. Her firing in Daniel's downfall had stripped away every layer of security she'd built for herself. She tried to find work, but the scandal followed her everywhere. No company wanted to hire a woman who'd become synonymous with infidelity and lies. One day, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line read, "For Theo." Curious, I opened it, half expecting more of Rachel's desperate ramblings. Instead, I found a single attachment, a video. Rachel appeared on the screen, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Hi, Theo," she began, her voice shaky. "Mommy wanted to make this video for you because I don't know if I'll ever get to see you again. I want you to know how much I love you. How much I've always loved you." Her voice cracked, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. And because of them, I lost everything. But losing you, that's what breaks me the most." I stopped the video halfway through. I couldn't bear to watch anymore. It wasn't for Theo. It was for me, a ploy to manipulate me into letting her back into his life. I sent the video to my lawyer, asking if it violated the court's ruling. He assured me it didn't, but he advised me to save it as evidence, just in case she tried anything in the future. I didn't reply to the email. But as satisfying as it was to see Rachel and Daniel suffer, there was still a part of me that felt hollow. Revenge hadn't brought the closure I thought it would. My family was gone, shattered beyond repair, and no amount of payback could piece it back together. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, Theo asleep in his room, I found myself scrolling through old photos. Pictures of our family before the lies, before the betrayal. Rachel smiling at the camera, Theo cradled in her arms. Me beside them, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. I hated her for what she'd done, but I couldn't deny that she'd been a good mother to Theo, once. And despite everything, I couldn't erase her from his life entirely. He'd grow up asking questions, wondering why his mother wasn't around. I wasn't sure how I'd answer, but I knew I'd have to eventually. For now, though, I focused on moving forward. I threw myself into my work, determined to build a stable life for Theo. My parents and a few close friends stepped up to help, providing the support I desperately needed. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. One evening, as I was tucking Theo into bed, he looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy?" he said softly. "Yes, buddy? Where's Mommy?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Mommy had to go away for a while," I said carefully. "Why?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and they need time to figure things out. But you don't have to worry, okay? Daddy's here, and I'm not going anywhere." He seemed to accept that, nodding sleepily before closing his eyes. As I watched him drift off, I realized that he was the only thing that mattered. Rachel, Daniel, the revenge. I'd done what I needed to protect Theo, to ensure he had a future free from their toxicity. Now, it was time to let go of the anger and focus on what truly mattered, raising my son and rebuilding the life we deserved. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. I focused on giving Theo the childhood he deserved, one filled with love, stability, and happiness. I stayed busy, throwing myself into work and parenting, trying to leave the past behind. But Rachel wasn't done. Her attempts to reach out had dwindled after the court ruling, but one evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, I received a knock at the door. Theo was playing in the living room, stacking his blocks, oblivious to the sound. When I opened the door, I found her standing there. Rachel. She looked like a shadow of the woman I'd married. Her once pristine appearance was gone, replaced by dark circles under her eyes and a hollowness in her cheeks. She wore a cheap, oversized jacket that hung awkwardly on her frame, her hair pulled into a messy bun. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to talk." I stared at her, my emotions warring between pity and anger. "There's nothing left to say," I replied, my tone cold. Her eyes filled with tears. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've ruined everything. But I miss Theo. I miss him so much." I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to slam the door in her face. "You lost that right when you chose him, when you chose Daniel over your own family." "I made a mistake," she cried, her voice breaking. "I know that now. He doesn't want me anymore. He never loved me, not really. But Theo, he's my son. Please, just let me see him. Just for a minute." I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder at Theo. He was humming to himself, completely unaware of the storm brewing at the front door. "You think you can just waltz back into his life after everything you've done?" I asked, my voice low and sharp. "You think a few tears will erase the lies, the betrayal?" "No," she whispered. "But I'll do anything to make it right. Anything." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me to keep Theo from hearing. "You want to make it right?" I asked, my voice cold. "Then leave us alone. For good. Let Theo have a chance at a normal life without your chaos." She shook her head, her tears falling freely. I can't just walk away from him." "You already did," I said, my voice icy. "The moment you started that affair, you walked away from both of us. You don't get to rewrite history now that you're alone and desperate." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse. "I know I can't fix what I've done," she murmured. "But please, don't take him away from me completely. I love him, even if I don't deserve him." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to unleash all the anger and pain she caused, but another part of me felt tired, exhausted by the weight of it all. "You need to leave," I said finally, my voice firm. "If you come near us again, I'll take legal action. Do you understand?" She looked up at me, her face crumpling in despair. "Please. Do you understand?" I repeated, my tone leaving no room for argument. She nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her steps slow and unsteady. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. Theo was still in the living room, stacking his blocks into a wobbly tower. "Daddy, look!" he said proudly, pointing at his creation. I forced a smile, pushing the encounter with Rachel to the back of my mind. "That's amazing, buddy!" As I sat down beside him, I realized that these moments with Theo, was all that mattered. Rachel was a ghost of our past, and I wouldn't let her haunt us anymore. After Rachel's visit, I resolved to close that chapter of my life for good. She'd made her choices, and now I had to focus on what truly mattered, Theo's happiness and my own healing. But life has a way of throwing unexpected twists your way. 2 months later, I received an email from Caroline Harper. The subject line was simple. "You need to see this." Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Attached was a video, a recording from a hidden camera inside Daniel's office. The footage showed Daniel and Rachel arguing, their voices raised, the tension between them palpable. "You promised me!" Rachel shouted, her face contorted with anger. "You said you'd take care of me, that we'd build a life together." Daniel scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "That was before you became a liability. Look at you, your life's a mess. You have nothing to offer me anymore." Her voice cracked. "I gave up everything for you. My marriage, my son, everything. And that's your problem, not mine, he replied coldly. We had fun, Rachel. But it's over. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding as I processed what I'd just seen. Rachel's downfall was complete. Daniel had used her, discarded her, and left her with nothing. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt hollow. This was what she deserved, wasn't it? Yet, seeing her reduced to this, a shell of the woman she once was, didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. I replied to Caroline with a simple, "Thank you." I didn't know what she intended by sending me the video, but I realized it didn't matter. I had no intention of using it against Rachel. She was already broken, and dragging her through more mud wouldn't change anything. The next few months were peaceful, a welcome change from the chaos of the past year. Theo flourished, his laughter filling the house and reminding me that life could still be beautiful. One day, while we were at the park, Theo tugged on my hand and pointed at a family sitting nearby, a father, a mother, and 2 young children. "Why don't I have a mommy anymore?" he asked, his voice innocent but filled with curiosity. The question stopped me in my tracks. I knelt down beside him, choosing my words carefully. "You do have a mommy, buddy," I said gently. "She just can't be with us right now." "Why not?" I hesitated, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. "Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and those mistakes can make it hard for them to stay close to the people they love." Theo thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Will she come back someday?" I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. "I don't know, buddy. But no matter what happens, you'll always have me." He smiled and hugged me tightly, and in that moment, I knew I'd done the right thing. Theo didn't need the full truth, not yet. One day, when he was older, I'd tell him everything. But for now, he just needed to feel safe and loved. As we walked home from the park, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't experienced before. The anger, the resentment, it wasn't gone completely, but it had dulled, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. Rachel hadn't contacted me since that night at the door. Maybe she'd finally taken my words to heart. Or maybe she was too lost in her own despair to reach out. Either way, I didn't plan to let her back into our lives. The life Theo and I were building was ours now, uncomplicated, honest, and filled with love. And as I tucked him into bed that night, watching his small chest rise and fall with each peaceful breath, I realized that was all I needed. The past was behind us. The future was ours to create. And I wasn't looking back. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit like and leave a comment with your favorite part. We'd love to hear your perspective.